Ever think about those cases, like really high-profile ones? And then what happens when it's someone like a really important government official, but they're accused of not doing their job? Like, not some big scandal, but just not doing what they were supposed to? Can they actually get away with it once their term's up?
Yeah.
Even if things went wrong because of them? Makes you wonder, about the whole accountability thing in public service.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, right? Like, where's the line? And what are the consequences? And today we're going deep on a Supreme Court case that deals with exactly that. We're talking about the duties and responsibilities, the accountability of a former deputy ombudsman in Mindanao.
So we're going all the way to the Supreme Court level with this.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to unpack everything, the initial complaints, the decisions from the lower courts, and of course, the final word from the Supreme Court itself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. Who are we talking about specifically?
The individual at the center of all this is Humphrey T. Monteroso. He used to be the deputy ombudsman for the Office of the Ombudsman for Mindanao. They call it OMBMIN for short.
OMBMIN. Got it. And he was a pretty high-ranking official, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. His salary grade was 30.
So this wasn't just like a minor slip-up. This is serious stuff.
Exactly. And actually, there were two separate administrative cases against him. The first one, it's filed under OMBCA 130374, alleged some pretty heavy charges: gross neglect of duty, gross insubordination, and conduct prejudicial to the best interest of the service.
Whoa, okay, those are some big words. Who brought those charges?
A couple, actually. Spouses Jesus and Melgerina Azabel.
And what was their issue with Monteroso?
Their complaint was rooted in a criminal case that they had filed with the OMB-MIN back in June 2009. It was against the mayor of General Santos City and involved allegations of tampering with land titles.
So a pretty serious accusation against the mayor.
Absolutely. And this criminal case, they gave it the docket number OMBMC 090262F, and guess who it got assigned to?
Monteroso.
Bingo! Now, despite the Azabels following up, they even filed motions asking for a quicker resolution. This case just sat there at the preliminary investigation stage for a full 2 years.
2 years? That's a long time to be stuck in limbo.
Tell me about it. And here's where it gets more interesting. In December of 2011, Assistant Ombudsman Azraman T. Rafanan stepped in. He personally endorsed the Azabel's complaint to Monteroso. And he was pretty clear he wanted action taken and a report within 7 days.
7 days? That sounds pretty urgent.
Right. But guess what? No response from Monteroso. Crickets.
So he just ignored a direct instruction from a higher up. That's bold.
It is. So January 2012 rolls around, and the Azabels are fed up. They take their issue straight to the Office of the President.
All right to the top.
Yep. And the Office of the President, they referred it to the Public Assistance Bureau of the OMB. That's the PA. And in February 2012, the PA sends a memo to Monteroso, basically saying, hey, remember that complaint? You need to do something about it.
And did he?
Still nothing from Monteroso.
This is unbelievable. So what finally happened with the Azabels case?
It took 4 years from the initial filing, but eventually the OMB-MIN dismissed the criminal complaint. They said there wasn't enough evidence, lack of probable cause.
4 years. That's a long time to wait for nothing.
Absolutely. So, with all of this happening, the Internal Affairs Board, the IAB, they decide to investigate Monteroso's actions.
It's about time. What do they find?
The IAB concluded that Monteroso was liable for simple neglect of duty and conduct prejudicial to the best interest of the service.
So they did find him guilty of something.
They did, but they didn't find him guilty of gross insubordination.
Wait, why not? I mean, he ignored direct orders.
The IAB, they reasoned that as the head of OMB-MIN, Monteroso had a responsibility to ensure that cases were handled in a timely manner. The 2-year delay without any explanation, especially after those follow-ups and the endorsement, showed a real lack of attention to his duties. Now, they didn't see it as a blatant refusal to obey a superior's order, so not gross insubordination, but definitely a disregard for his responsibilities. And his excuse about a heavy workload, they didn't buy it, not when he couldn't even respond to official communications.
So basically they're saying that even if it wasn't outright defiance, his lack of action was still a problem.
Exactly. And on top of that, they felt that his silence, not responding to the Azabels, Ea Rafanan, the PAB, plus that huge delay, it damaged the public's trust in the Office of the Ombudsman. Hence, the conduct prejudicial to the best interest of the service charge. It's like they're making a point that even seemingly small slip-ups can have big consequences.
So ignoring emails and not meeting deadlines, it's not just a personal bad habit, it has wider implications.
Exactly.
What happened then? What was the penalty for Monteroso?
Initially, the IAB was thinking about suspending him for 9 months, but by the time they reached a decision, Monteroso's term had ended.
Oh, so he dodged that bullet.
Not quite. The ombudsman at the time, Conchita Carpio Morales, she approved a different penalty, a fine, equal to 6 months of his salary.
Ouch. That's got her.
And it gets worse. The money was to be deducted from his retirement benefits and any other money they owed him. He tried to appeal, filed a motion for reconsideration, but no luck.
Denied. So that was it then. End of story.
Not quite. Monteroso appealed, so this case, it went up to the Court of Appeals.
Okay, and what do they say?
In their ruling, CAGRSP number 143404, they sided with the ombudsman. They also found him guilty of simple neglect of duty because of that crazy delay. And they agreed with the conduct prejudicial to the best interest of the service charge, saying he violated the rules about dealing with cases quickly and just ignored official communications.
So the Court of Appeals was in agreement with the ombudsman.
Yep. They upheld everything, including that fine in place of the suspension.
Got it. So this all went to the Supreme Court, and I know you said there were 2 cases, but let's stick with this one for now. What was the Supreme Court looking at exactly?
This specific case, it landed in the Supreme Court as GR number 235274. The date on the decision is October 13th, 2021. And what the Supreme Court had to figure out was whether Monteroso was really guilty of those charges. Simple neglect of duty and conduct prejudicial to the best interest of the service. Plus, Monteroso was trying to argue that his situation was similar to another case, Gonzales III, Office of the President. He was hoping they'd see it the same way. And lastly, the Supreme Court had to check if the penalty fit with the rules, the revised rules on administrative cases in the civil service, the RRACCS.
A lot to untangle there. So what did the Supreme Court decide?
They sided against Monteroso and upheld the decision of the Court of Appeals. Basically, they said that he was definitely guilty of simple neglect of duty. Why? Because he just didn't respond to those communications within the time frame set by law. Republic Act number 66713, Section 5A, to be exact. That's the Code of Conduct and Ethical Standards for Public Officials and Employees. It says you have 15 working days. He ignored that. And the Supreme Court, they saw that as a straight-up disregard for his duty.
No wiggle room there.
Nope. And about that Gonzales III case Monteroso kept bringing up, the Supreme Court said, nope, not the same. In Gonzales III, it was about a massive delay in dealing with a motion. With Monteroso, he didn't even acknowledge anything, didn't even try. So totally different.
Okay, that makes sense.
And they also kept that conduct prejudicial to the best interest of the service charge, because of that 4-year delay with no good reason. They said it hurt the reputation of the OMB-MIN. And they even cited another case, Miranda v. CSC, to back that up.
So they were pretty thorough.
Definitely. And about the penalty. That fine equaled a 6-month salary. They kept that too. They said, yeah, the simple neglect made things worse. But then they considered his 25 years of service. That lessened the blow a bit. So it balanced out to that medium-level penalty for the conduct prejudicial charge.
All right, so that wraps up the first case against Monteroso, and if I remember correctly, the second one involves even more serious accusations. Grave misconduct and grave abuse of authority.
Oh.
This sounds pretty heavy.
It is. And we're talking about 2 separate complaints here. The first from a guy named Emmanuel Archiano, who was Monteroso's personal aide.
Personal aide, so like an assistant.
Yeah, pretty much. Archiano claimed he was recruited back in July of 2011, and get this, by Monteroso's brother-in-law, his job. Well, he says it was a mix of stuff, helping out around Monteroso's house and doing some administrative work at the OMB-MIN. But here's the kicker. He was supposed to be paid from Monteroso's plantilla, like an official staff member, as an administrative aide the second. That's a salary grade 2 position.
Hold on. So they were allegedly using public funds to pay someone for personal work. That's a huge no-no.
Oh, absolutely. It's a serious ethical violation if it's true. And this is where it gets even shadier.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. Archiano also claimed that Monteroso told him to open bank accounts. 2 of them. First with Metrobank, then with BDO.
Okay. Red flags popping up everywhere.
Right. Archiano said that huge amounts of money, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pesos, were going into these accounts and then being withdrawn, all on Monteroso's orders. And Archiano was adamant that he didn't have that kind of money to be putting in there. Then, in March 2012, Archiano resigns. He hands over whatever money was left, and, most importantly, when he files his exit statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth, his SALN, he states clear as day that Monteroso is the real owner of that BDO account.
Whoa, that's a big statement to make.
It is. And after that, Archiano blew the whistle, reported the whole thing to the IAB.
Wow, so we've got potential misuse of authority and shady financial dealings. What about the other complaint, the one from Emilia Peligro?
Amelia Peligro. She was the chief administrative officer at OMB-MIN. And in December 2012, the IAB, they were already looking into other stuff about Monteroso, and they issued a subpoena ducis tecum.
Oh, what?
Subpoena ducis tecum. It's basically a legal order to hand over documents.
Oh, okay.
Right, so they wanted Peligro to bring them the HR files for Monteroso and some others, but apparently Monteroso had given all the HR stuff to someone else, Marisol Ariarte, and he'd specifically told Peligro not to give out any records, even to the IAB, without his say-so.
Seriously, trying to control the investigation.
Yeah.
That's pretty suspicious.
And get this, he allegedly went off on Peligro, told her off, and even brought up her low position. Like it meant she couldn't question him.
Jeez, what a jerk.
It's definitely not cool. And it really sounds like he was trying to obstruct the IAB's investigation, maybe even intimidating witnesses.
So what happened with these more serious charges? What did the IAB and the Ombudsman decide?
The IAB, they found Monteroso guilty of both grave misconduct and grave abuse of authority. On the misconduct charge, they said he took advantage of Arquiano, making him do personal errands while he was on the OMB-MIN payroll. And then there was that whole thing with the bank accounts, using Arquiano as a front for questionable transactions. As for the grave abuse of authority, they focused on how he treated Peligro, trying to block her from giving information to the IAB, humiliating her. They called it oppression. Pure and simple.
So both charges stuck.
Yeah, they did. And at first they wanted to dismiss him outright, kick him out of the service. But his term had already ended. So instead, the ombudsman, Conchita Carpio Morales, she approved a fine. Again, 6 months worth of his salary. And this time there were some extra penalties tacked on.
Like what?
Well, it was a whole package. He loses his retirement benefits, his eligibility for civil service is canceled, and he's banned from ever holding public office again. Oh, and he can't even take any civil service exams anymore.
Wow, they really threw the book at him.
Yeah, they did. And again, he tried to fight it with a motion for reconsideration. Denied. No dice.
Persistent, I'll give him that. But the Ombudsman's decision was final.
Well, he appealed it to the Court of Appeals.
Of course he did.
Right. This is Monteroso we're talking about. Anyway, the Court of Appeals heard the case, and they issued their decision under CAGR SP number 143405.
Ram.
They agreed with the Ombudsman, guilty on both counts, grave misconduct and grave abuse of authority. They backed up the findings, saying he totally misused his power and OMB-MIN resources by getting Arquiano that job just for personal benefit. And those bank transactions. Yeah, they didn't like the look of those either. They also agreed about the grave abuse of authority, focusing on how he tried to stop Peligro from cooperating with the IAB. They upheld that 6-month salary fine and all those extra penalties, too.
So Monteroso struck out again.
He did. And he tried another argument, claiming that the panel members who investigated him should have recused themselves.
Why is that?
He claimed they were biased against him. But the Court of Appeals shot that down, too. They explained that those panel members were just investigators. They didn't have a personal stake in the case. It was spouses, Osabel, Arquiano, and Peligro, who were the real complainants, the ones with the personal interest in the outcome.
That makes sense. So the Court of Appeals basically shut down all of Monteroso's arguments.
They did.
Okay, so now we're back to the Supreme Court. What does they have to say about all of this?
So the second case against Monteroso, it ended up at the Supreme Court as GR number 235275. And like the other case, the decision came out on October 13th, 2021.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court had a few big questions to answer. First, was Monteroso actually guilty of grave misconduct and grave abuse of authority? Second, should those panel members have been disqualified? And third, was the penalty over the top?
Big question. So let's break it down. What did they say about Monteroso's guilt?
They didn't hesitate. They upheld the guilty verdicts from the lower courts. They said that those panel members, they were just doing their job as investigators, not acting as complainants themselves. So, no conflict of interest there. They even cited Administrative Order number 16/2003 to back that up.
Okay, that settles that. So on the grave misconduct charge.
Guilty as charged. The Supreme Court really focused on the fact that Monteroso himself admitted that Arquiano was doing chores at his house, all while getting paid by the OMB-MIN. And then they brought up those bank accounts again. They concluded that Monteroso knew what he was doing, intentionally breaking the rules. They used Arquiano's sworn statement and all those bank records as evidence.
So no getting around that.
Nope. And on the grave abuse of authority charge, the Supreme Court said he was guilty of oppression. They didn't like how he treated Peligro. trying to scare her, putting her down for cooperating with the IAB. They said it was a clear abuse of power.
And the penalty.
The Supreme Court upheld the 6-month salary fine because he was already retired. But remember those other penalties, the ones that banned him from holding office again. Those stayed too. They made it clear that retiring doesn't mean you get a free pass.
A strong message from the Supreme Court. No escaping accountability, even after leaving office.
Absolutely. What this case shows us is that it doesn't matter how high-ranking you are, public officials are accountable. Even after their term ends, neglecting their duties, abusing their power, misconduct, it all has consequences, and the courts will enforce those consequences.
This case really highlights the need for ethical standards in government. Makes you think about the people we trust with power and how we hold them responsible.
It does. And to make sure we all understand what happened here, let's quickly recap the main legal concepts that came up.
Love a good legal recap.
First up, we have simple neglect of duty. That's basically when you don't give enough attention to your work, being careless or indifferent.
Sounds like a lot of office workers I know.
Maybe, but in a government job, it's a bigger deal. Then we have conduct prejudicial to the best interest of the service. This is when your actions, even if they're not directly related to your job, hurt the reputation of your office.
Bad PR for the government.
Exactly. Then we have grave misconduct. That's serious stuff. It means you're being corrupt or intentionally breaking the law, and it's tied to your official duties.
Not good.
Not at all. And finally, we have grave abuse of authority, which they often call oppression. This is when someone in power uses their position to hurt others, being cruel, using excessive force.
Yikes.
Right. So those are the big legal ideas at play in this case.
And a big thank you to you for breaking it all down.
My pleasure.
This was a really fascinating deep dive. For anyone listening who found this as insightful as I did, and you want to keep up with important legal stuff happening in the Philippines, make sure you're subscribed to the deep dive. We'll be back with more in-depth analyses of cases like this, exploring how they shape